At 8:47 on a Tuesday night, Lena Morales stood beside my desk while the last cleaning cart rattled toward the elevators. She had already sent everyone else home. Her coat was still hanging in her office, her laptop was open, and the expression on her face was not the calm, controlled look she wore in client meetings. "Ethan, I need you to stay," she said. Before I could ask why, she walked back into her office and waited for me to follow. Then she closed the glass door behind us, turned the lock, and lowered the blinds. "Someone is stealing from this company," she said, "and they're using your name to do it." Before I tell you what happened after that door closed, subscribe if you enjoy stories about trust, hard choices, and the kind of love that grows where no one expects it. And tell me in the comments whether you would stay to defend yourself or walk away before things became even more complicated. My name is Ethan Cole. I was 30 years old, a senior restoration architect at Marlowe and Finch, a small but respected design firm in Seattle that specialized in saving old theaters, schools, and civic buildings from demolition. I had been single for almost 3 years after an engagement ended quietly and badly, the way some relationships do when two people keep postponing honesty until there is nothing left to say. Lena, my boss, was 26, exactly 4 years younger than me, and already the firm's managing director. She had earned the role after bringing in 2 major preservation contracts, but plenty of people still whispered that she was too young, too serious, or too ambitious. I knew better. She was the most prepared person in every room, and the loneliest person in most of them. I stared at her across the small office, trying to understand what she had just said. "Using my name, how?" She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was an authorization record for a payment of $84,000 to a consulting company I had never heard of. My employee identification number appeared beneath the approval line. So did a digital signature that looked almost exactly like mine. "That's not my signature," I said. "I know. I compared it to the original forms in your personnel file." She folded her arms, but the gesture looked less defensive than exhausted. "The curve on the C is wrong. You always connect it to the O. Whoever copied it used the version from your building permit application last spring." I read the record again. The payment had been attached to the Harbor Light Theater project, the most important contract our firm had ever won. I had spent 11 months redesigning the century-old building without destroying the original plasterwork, balcony rails, or hand-painted ceiling. If the city discovered fraudulent payments, the contract could be frozen. If the board believed I was responsible, my career would be finished. "When did you find this?" I asked. She walked to a filing cabinet, removed a blue folder, and placed it on the desk. Inside were copies of 3 more transfers made over the previous 2 months. Each one had been approved under a different employee's identification number. 2 belonged to people who had recently resigned. The third belonged to me. The consulting company was called Northline Advisory. Its address led to a mailbox rental office outside Tacoma. "Why show me first?" I asked. "Because tomorrow morning, Caleb Rowan is presenting these records to the board." My stomach tightened. Caleb was our chief operating officer, a polished 42-year-old man who had joined the firm a year earlier after working for a national development company. He talked constantly about growth, efficiency, and strategic partnerships. What he usually meant was cutting staff, selling projects, and turning historic buildings into luxury spaces no one in the original neighborhood could afford. "Then why hasn't he confronted me?" "Because he doesn't want an explanation. He wants a target." She opened another document. It was a draft agenda for an emergency board meeting scheduled at 8 the next morning. Item 4 read, "Discussion of Harbor Light irregularities and personnel accountability." I leaned back in the chair. "You think Caleb framed me? I think there are too many coincidences." That isn't the same thing. No. Her voice softened. It isn't. Which is why I locked the door. I need the truth before I accuse anyone. I should have been angry that she had waited until the night before the meeting. I should have demanded a lawyer, called Human Resources, or left the building before I became part of a secret investigation. Instead, I looked at the woman standing across from me and noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "Caleb told the board you and I have been unusually close. I almost laughed because the accusation was absurd. Lena and I rarely spoke about anything that was not tied to a deadline. She reviewed my plans, challenged my assumptions, and occasionally left a cup of black coffee on my desk when she knew I had worked through lunch. That was the extent of our visible relationship." "What does unusually close mean?" "He said I defended your project budgets too aggressively. He mentioned that I rejected his recommendation to remove you from Harbor Light after the second delay. Then he's turning competent management into favoritism." "Yes." She looked towards the blinds as if she could see the entire dark office through them. "And if we stay here alone all night trying to prove he's lying, he may call that favoritism too." There it was. The real reason she looked afraid. Not because she doubted me, but because trusting me could be used against both of us. "If you want me to leave, say it." Her expression changed immediately. "I don't." "Then what do you want?" She took a slow breath. "I want you to help me understand the project files. I want to know whether these transfers connect to the design changes Caleb pushed last month. And I want one person in this building who will tell me the truth, even if it costs me my job." "All right," I said. "Unlock the door." She frowned. "Why? Because if we're doing this properly, we're not hiding. Leave the blinds down if the documents are confidential, but unlock the door. Then email the board chair and tell her I'm here assisting with a review at your request." She studied me. "You plan for accusations like this?" "I'm an architect. Half my job is imagining how something can fail before it does." A faint smile appeared. "That may be the least romantic description of your personality I've ever heard." My heart stumbled at the word romantic, but she had already turned away. She unlocked the door, raised one blind halfway, and sent the email. The Harbor Light project occupied a corner conference table and 3 shelves of binders. We pulled invoices, contractor logs, change orders, and consultant agreements into Lena's office. At first, we worked like we always did. Quickly, formally, without wasted words. She read numbers, I checked drawings, she traced approvals, I compared dates. The first break came at 9:36. One of the North Line payments had been coded as Structural Acoustics Consulting. That sounded plausible until I recognized the invoice date. "We didn't have an acoustics review that week," I said. Lena looked up. "Are you sure?" "The auditorium testing happened in September. This invoice is from November." "Could it have been a supplementary review?" "Not without me knowing." I approved every consultant who entered the building. She moved closer to study the document. The office was small enough that her shoulder brushed mine. Neither of us stepped away immediately. "Look at the service description," I said. "It references the East Annex." "What about it?" "There is no East Annex. Caleb used that phrase in his redevelopment proposal, but the original building plans call it the rehearsal wing. 3 weeks earlier, Caleb had argued that the rehearsal wing should be demolished and replaced with a private event entrance. The city rejected the idea because the wing had historical value. He had been furious, though he disguised it behind a smile and a speech about fiscal discipline. "You think he created a fake consulting expense using language from his own proposal?" she said. "I think someone did. You're being careful. You asked for the truth, not the answer you wanted." Her eyes rested on me for a moment longer than necessary. "That's why I asked you to stay." At 10:15, the rain began. Seattle rain was usually patient, a quiet, gray curtain that settled over the city without demanding attention. That night it struck the windows hard enough to blur the lights across Elliott Bay. Wind pushed against the glass. Somewhere outside the office, a loose sign knocked rhythmically against metal. Lena ordered food from a 24-hour diner because neither of us had eaten since lunch. When the delivery arrived, we sat at the conference table with grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, and documents spread between us. "Why did Caleb think the board would believe I stole the money?" I asked. "Because you objected to his vendor changes. Because you have access to project approvals. Because you're respected enough to make the accusation shocking, but not powerful enough to survive it." He said those exact words to me last week, except he was describing another employee. "Who?" "Marisol Chen, our former finance manager." Marisol had resigned suddenly 2 months earlier. The office rumor was that she had accepted a better position in Portland. Lena told me the truth was more complicated. Marisol had raised questions about Northline, but Caleb dismissed them as bookkeeping errors. A week later, someone filed an anonymous complaint accusing her of sharing confidential salary data. The complaint was never proven, yet the humiliation pushed her out. "Then let's look harder now," I said. She nodded. At 11:02, we found a pattern in the access logs. Each false payment had been entered after midnight from a workstation in the executive suite. The login credentials belonged to different employees, but the machine identification was the same. "That proves the device," I said. "Not the person. His assistant, Nora, leaves every day at 6. Could someone else use her computer? The suite requires a key card after 8. We pulled the building access report. On all 4 nights, Caleb's card had entered the floor between 11:30 and midnight. "We need copies outside the company server," I said. "Agreed." She opened a secure board portal and uploaded the records, then sent them to the firm's external attorney. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, but when she finished, she did not withdraw her hands. She stared at the screen. "What happens if the board protects him?" I asked. "I resign." The answer hit harder than I expected. She stood and walked to the window, the rain breaking her reflection. "Because Caleb has been negotiating to sell controlling interest in the firm to Westbridge Development," she said. The board likes the offer. They think it gives us stability. Westbridge demolishes historic properties." "I know. They bought the Union Hall in Spokane and replaced it with condominiums." "I know, Ethan." Her voice sharpened, then softened. "That's why I've been fighting the sale for 6 months. I understood then. Caleb was not simply stealing. He was weakening the company, discrediting employees who challenged him, and creating financial pressure that made a sale appear necessary." "If the board approves Westbridge, you leave," I said. "I won't become the friendly face of a company that destroys the work we promised to protect. What happens to everyone else? That is the question that has kept me awake for 6 months." She turned from the window. Her eyes were bright, but she refused to let the tears fall. My father spent 30 years building this firm. He believed old buildings mattered because people leave pieces of themselves inside them. He died before I took this job, and every decision I make feels like another chance to either protect what he built or prove everyone right about me. "Everyone right about what?" I asked. "That I was promoted because the board felt sorry for me. That I'm too young. That I'm emotional when I defend a project and cold when I defend myself." She smiled without humor. "It's impressive how many opposite things a woman can be accused of at once." She looked at me then, not as my boss evaluating an answer, but as a woman who had been carrying too much weight and had finally allowed someone else to see it. Then the office lights went out. The emergency system clicked on a second later, filling the hallway with dim red light. Lena inhaled sharply. I hate dark rooms. I turned on my phone flashlight. We can move to the conference area. It has emergency windows. She nodded. But when thunder rolled above us, her hand caught my wrist. She released it immediately. Sorry, I'm not usually this unprofessional. Being afraid and being unprofessional are not the same thing. She gave a tired laugh. You make being human sound simple. No, you make it sound like a policy violation. That laugh was real. It changed her whole face. We moved into the conference room. While I found 2 battery lanterns, she discovered an old photograph inside the blue folder. It showed her at perhaps 12 years old, standing beside a gray-haired man in front of the Harbor Light Theater. The marquee behind them was missing letters. She wore a hard hat several sizes too large and held a rolled drawing against her chest. My father took me there before the city condemned it, she said. He told me someone would save it one day. And now we are. We are, I repeated. She looked down at the photograph. You know why I assigned Harbor Light to you? Because you looked at the building the way my father did. At your interview, everyone else discussed growth. You talked about the people who remembered seeing movies there as children. You remember that? I remember everything that matters. Lena, I began. Her phone rang. Caleb's name appeared on the screen, and she answered on speaker. Still at the office? He asked. Working alone? No. Ethan is here helping me review Harbor Light records. At midnight? You scheduled an emergency board meeting for 8. I'm surprised you told him. I'm surprised you didn't. His tone cooled. Be careful, Lena. Protecting an employee before the review is complete could look inappropriate. Then it's fortunate I'm reviewing evidence rather than protecting anyone. You always were idealistic, and you always confuse that with weakness. He knows, I said. We continued working, but the mood had shifted. Every elevator sound made us look toward the hall. At 12:46, we found the document that changed everything. It was a proposed acquisition agreement between Marlowe and Finch and Westbridge Development. The file had been hidden inside an archived vendor folder, probably because Caleb assumed no architect would examine accounting backups. The agreement promised Caleb a substantial executive position after the sale. It also required Marlowe and Finch to report material internal financial weakness before final approval. The false payments were not random theft. They were evidence manufactured to justify the sale. He was going to blame the losses on employees, push the board into panic, and present Westbridge as the rescue, she said. And Harbor Light? Westbridge wants the property. The city owned the theater, but our restoration contract gave the project momentum and political protection. If the contract collapsed under scandal, Westbridge could argue that preservation was financially impossible. This was never just about the company. No. Lena closed the laptop. It was about the building, too. Caleb appeared in the doorway carrying an umbrella and wearing the same charcoal coat he had worn at the afternoon executive meeting. His gaze moved from the documents on the table to Lena, then to me. I thought I might find you both here, he said. The board has the access logs, Lena replied. He stepped into the room. You should be careful about making accusations based on incomplete information. You mean like accusing Ethan? I didn't accuse him. The records did. The records you created. Caleb looked at me. Do you understand what this looks like? Your boss calls you into her office after hours, locks the door, and spends the night helping you avoid an investigation. Even if you survive the financial accusation, your reputation is finished. She emailed the board chair before we reviewed a single file. The door has been unlocked since 9. The external attorney received copies of every document we found. You think procedure will save you? No, I said. The truth will. Lena stepped beside me. Leave the office. I'm the chief operating officer. And I'm the managing director. Your access is suspended pending review. You don't have that authority. I do when company assets are at risk. You wrote the policy, Caleb. He moved toward the table, but I blocked him. Don't, I said. Lena held his gaze. I ignored Marisol once. I'm not making that mistake twice. This company will collapse without the sale, then we'll rebuild it honestly. He left without another word. Lena remained standing until the elevator numbers showed that he had reached the lobby. Then all the strength went out of her at once. She sat down hard in the nearest chair and covered her face with both hands. I almost let him destroy everything. I should have listened to Marisol. You can call her. What if she never forgives me? Then you apologize without asking her to. That sounded rehearsed. It is. She understood what I meant. My former fiancé had once told me I apologized only when I wanted the discomfort to end. It had taken losing the relationship for me to understand that remorse and repair were not the same thing. Lena's voice softened. Is that what happened before? I kept choosing work over difficult conversations, I said. Not because work mattered more, but because it was easier to solve. Buildings tell you where they're failing. People usually don't. Do you still love her? No. I looked at the floor, then back at Lena. But I still regret who I was when she needed honesty. Maybe that's why you're so careful now. With everyone? Not with everyone, I said. I could have moved closer. Instead, I stood and offered my hand. We have a board meeting in 7 hours. She took my hand and stood. Neither of us let go immediately. At 2:10, we called Marisol. I know it's late, Lena said, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but you were right about Northline. I should have believed you. Caleb used the company system to create false payments, and he used your resignation to make the scheme easier. Marisol's voice was cold. Why are you telling me? Because the board meets at 8, because your name may come up, and because I owe you the truth before I ask whether you kept any records. Then Marisol said, I kept everything. She emailed us copies of messages in which Caleb instructed her to reclassify vendor expenses and warned that continued resistance would affect her future at the firm. She also had a voice memo recorded after one meeting. Not because she planned to expose him, but because she no longer trusted herself to remember his exact threats. But before ending the call, Lena said, Marisol, I'm sorry. She simply answered, do better tomorrow. I will. After the call, Lena looked at me. You really believe honesty is worth the pain, don't you? That's usually when it matters. At 3 hours, the storm weakened. The office smelled like cold coffee, paper and rain seeping through an old window frame near the drafting room. We had enough evidence for the board, but neither of us could sleep. Lena found a wool blanket in the wellness room and draped it around her shoulders. I made coffee strong enough to qualify as a structural material. She studied the Harbor Light model beside my desk. You repaired the miniature balcony rail. It broke last week. She smiled. Of course you noticed. I notice fragile things. Do you? Yes. Ethan, if tomorrow goes badly, promise me you won't resign because of me. I wasn't planning to. You will if the board asks you to distance yourself. I've watched you protect every junior architect on your team. That is part of my job. No, it is part of you. But I don't want your career becoming collateral damage in my fight with Caleb. And I don't want you sacrificing the firm because you think leadership means standing alone. We're not very good at following each other's instructions. Maybe that's why we work well together. She laughed quietly. Careful. That sounded almost romantic. I stepped closer, slowly enough that she could move away. Then her phone alarm rang at 5:30. Lena looked at the screen and exhaled. "We need to prepare." We both acted as though nothing had almost happened. At 8, the board assembled in the main conference room. 5 members joined in person. 2 appeared by video. Caleb arrived with an attorney and the expression of a man who believed confidence could become evidence if he wore it long enough. She did not dramatize. She did not accuse beyond what the records proved. She walked the board through the transfers, the copied signatures, the device logs, the keycard entries, the Westbridge agreement, and Marisol's messages. Then she acknowledged her own failure to investigate sooner. "I allowed operational authority to become concentrated without sufficient oversight," she said. "That was my responsibility. I will accept whatever governance review the board considers appropriate, but the evidence does not support disciplinary action against Ethan Cole or any employee whose credentials were misused." Caleb's attorney challenged the access logs. Caleb suggested Marisol was retaliating. One board member asked whether Lena's late-night meeting with me compromised her judgment. "No," she said. "I requested Mr. Cole's assistance because the invoices referenced technical work on a project he leads." Before reviewing files, I notified the board chair in writing. The office door remained unlocked, and all evidence was transferred to outside counsel. If the board wishes to evaluate my judgment, evaluate the procedure I followed. Not an insinuation about 2 employees being in the same room after dark. He turned to me. "Did Ms. Morales promise you protection?" "No. Did she tell you she believed you were innocent before the review?" "Yes." Caleb leaned back. Then her conclusion was predetermined. She believed I was innocent because she checked my signature before she called me. But belief wasn't the conclusion. Evidence was. In fact, the first thing I asked her to do was unlock the office door and notify the board that I was assisting. She agreed because she cared more about a defensible process than protecting her own comfort. If you want to know whether she showed favoritism, look at the 11 months of red marks she put on my Harbor Light drawings. She has challenged nearly every important decision I've made. The reason I trust her is not because she makes my work easier. It's because she makes it better. The board recessed. When they returned, Caleb's access was terminated pending investigation. The Westbridge vote was suspended, an independent audit was ordered, and I was formally cleared. It should have felt like victory. Instead, the next few weeks became the most careful and uncomfortable period of my life. Caleb's attorney leaked rumors that Lena and I had manufactured the case to remove him. Nothing in the evidence supported the claim, but rumors do not need support. They only need repetition. 2 trade blogs mentioned the late-night closed-door inquiry. A board member advised Lena to limit private contact with me until the investigation ended. Our conversations became brief and public. She stopped leaving coffee on my desk. She assigned another principal architect to review Harbor Light. When we passed in the hallway, she gave me the same professional nod she gave everyone else. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I received an offer from a preservation nonprofit in Portland. The position would let me lead a regional theater restoration program. It was the kind of opportunity I had wanted for years. Then Marisol returned. Not as an employee, but to meet the auditors. She walked past my desk, carrying the red leather folder she used before she resigned. 2 hours later, Lena followed her toward the elevators. I could not hear everything, but I heard Marisol say, "Apologies matter less than what changes after them." That afternoon, Lena called a staff meeting. She announced new financial controls, anonymous reporting procedures, and a policy preventing any executive from controlling both vendor approval and compliance review. She also said Marisol had agreed to advise the firm during the audit. When the meeting ended, Lena asked me to remain. Everyone else left, and the conference room door stayed open. I heard about Portland, she said. The nonprofit called to verify your project history. I was going to tell you. When? After I decided. You already decided to interview. That isn't the same thing. You've barely spoken to me for 3 weeks, because every conversation was being watched. I know, do you? She glanced toward the open door. I wasn't avoiding you because I regretted that night. What exactly happened that night, Lena? We found evidence, she said. That's all? Her eyes searched mine. Is that what you believe? I don't know what to believe. We almost said something to each other twice, and since then you've treated me like being alone in the same hallway would cause a scandal. So Caleb still gets to decide how we behave? No. Reality does. She lowered her voice. You told the board that you trusted me because I made your work better. I need you to trust me now, when this feels worse. What are you asking me to wait for? The audit, the new reporting structure, a decision I'm not ready to discuss. That sounds like another closed door. Maybe you should take Portland, she said. She continued, though each word seemed to cost her something. You deserve a position no one can say you received because of me. Then stop trying to make it for me. I walked out before I said something I could not repair. The next morning, I accepted the Portland offer. For the first few days, I felt relieved. A clean job, a new city, a future untouched by rumors. Then the relief faded, and I was left with the truth. I was not leaving only for the opportunity. I was leaving because staying required patience, and patience felt too much like helplessness. Harbor Light consumed my final month. The restored ceiling panels returned from conservation. The balcony passed its load test. We uncovered an original ticket booth hidden behind drywall and convinced the city to preserve it. Every day the building came closer to reopening, and every day my time at the firm grew shorter. On my last Friday, the staff held a small farewell reception in the studio. There was cake, cheap, sparkling wine, and a framed print of the Harbor Light marquee signed by everyone. Lena arrived late from a board meeting. She stayed near the back, smiling when others spoke, saying almost nothing. Portland is lucky to have you, she said. I packed the last model into a cardboard box and left before sunset. The Harbor Light Theater reopened 2 weeks later. Because I had led the restoration, the city invited me to attend even though I had already started my new job. I drove up from Portland on Saturday morning, telling myself I was returning for the building, not for Lena. The marquee glowed again for the first time in 23 years. Hundreds of people filled the sidewalk. Elderly couples pointed toward the ticket booth and told grandchildren where they had once stood in line. Musicians played beneath the restored plaster arches. The air smelled like rain, popcorn, and fresh paint. I found Lena near the stage wearing a dark green dress and no visible trace of the sleepless woman from that night in the office. Before we could speak, the mayor began the dedication ceremony. She thanked the city, the preservation committee, the contractors, and finally our firm. Then she invited Lena to the microphone. Lena spoke about the building's history and the people who had fought to save it. She thanked Marisol for helping establish new accountability standards. She thanked the staff for surviving uncertainty without losing faith in the work. And I want to recognize Ethan Cole, she said, whose design did more than preserve this theater. It preserved the memories people trusted us to protect. He reminded this firm that integrity is not an abstract value. It is a series of decisions made when the easier choice is available. After the ceremony, we met beneath the balcony. You came, she said. You invited half the state. I was hoping one person would accept. I looked toward the crowd. The theater looks good. It looks exactly the way you promised it could. And the firm? The audit is complete. Caleb has been charged with fraud and attempted evidence tampering. Westbridge withdrew its offer. There's something you didn't hear. Before she could continue, a group of donors approached. Lena shifted back into her public role, thanking them, answering questions, and posing for photographs. Then she caught my sleeve as the group moved away. "Stay," she said. An hour later, after the guests left and the theater staff began cleaning, Lena asked me to walk with her. We crossed the wet streets to the Marlowe and Finch office 3 blocks away. The studio was dark. My old desk belonged to a new architect now, though the small repaired Harbor Light model still stood near the window. Lena entered her office and waited for me to follow. Then she closed the door behind us. This time she did not lock it. "I resigned as managing director yesterday," she said. I stared at her. "You left your job because of me? I changed my job, and no." Her expression sharpened. "If you think I would restructure my life only to make a romantic gesture, you have learned nothing about me. I accepted the chair of our new Preservation Foundation, with no authority over staff, projects, salaries, or promotions. I changed roles because the company needs independent governance, because fundraising and preservation policy are what I'm best at, and because I'm tired of proving I can survive a job I no longer want." I began discussing the move the week after the audit started, the decision you weren't ready to discuss. I remembered our argument, the pain in her face when I accused her of hiding behind another closed door. "I'm sorry," I said. "For taking Portland? No, for making your caution about me. For assuming distance meant regret. You were protecting an active investigation. And myself." She met my eyes. "I was afraid that if I told you how I felt before the structure changed, you would stay for me. Then every opportunity you lost would become something I had to wonder about. Would that have been so terrible? Yes, if you resented me later. Now you have a job you chose freely. I have a role I chose freely. The investigation is over. I am not your boss." "What are you asking?" I said. For the first time since I had known her, Lena looked nervous without trying to hide it. "I'm asking whether that night meant what I thought it meant. What did you think it meant? That when everything around me was uncertain, you were the person I trusted enough to ask to stay. And that when you looked at me in the dark conference room, I wanted you to stop being careful for 1 minute. I wanted that too. Then why didn't you? Because you were my boss. Because you were exhausted and afraid. Because I needed to know that anything between us would still be true in daylight." "It is daylight somewhere," she said. I laughed softly. "That is a terrible argument." Her eyes shone. "Ethan, I don't need you to rescue me or promise me a future tonight. I need one honest answer. Do you want this?" "Yes." I drew her toward me slowly, giving her every chance to stop. She didn't. When I kissed her, there was no storm, emergency, or evidence scattered across the table. It was quiet, certain, and overdue. She rested one hand against my chest. I touched her face, feeling her smile before we pulled apart. The second kiss held everything the first one had been too gentle to say. The fear of losing each other, the weeks of distance, the anger, the trust, and the relief of finally choosing something without hiding behind duty. "I still live in Seattle," she said. "You live in Portland. This will be inconvenient. Most important restorations are." She laughed, and the sound took me back to the dark office, the battery lanterns, and the moment I first saw the person behind the title. We did not solve the distance that night. We did something better. We made a plan. We agreed to take the train on alternating weekends. We agreed not to make career promises during the first 3 months. We agreed that if either of us felt the relationship was becoming an obligation, we would say it before resentment had time to grow. Our first real date happened the next evening at a small restaurant near Pike Place Market. Lena arrived carrying 2 folders, and I teased her until she left them with the host. We talked for 3 hours. Not about fraud or board politics, but about my mother's newspaper clippings, Lena's fear of thunderstorms, my failed engagement, and the years she had spent believing competence was the only safe way to earn affection. I told her I had spent years confusing patience with silence. She reminded me they were opposites. Patience waits while remaining present. Silence disappears. 3 months later, Marisol accepted a permanent role on the firm's audit committee. She and Lena never returned to the easy friendship they once had, but they built something more honest. Lena stopped treating forgiveness like a reward she could earn on schedule. She changed the systems that had failed, listened when Marisol challenged her, and allowed trust to regrow at its own speed. Caleb eventually pleaded guilty to financial fraud. The money was recovered through insurance and asset seizure, though the company carried the damage to its reputation for a while. Marlowe and Finch survived by becoming smaller, more transparent, and more committed to the work that had made it matter in the first place. The preservation foundation Lena led raised enough money to protect 3 neighborhood landmarks in its first year. The nonprofit gave me room to lead projects without pretending every old building could be saved through passion alone. I learned budgets, public policy, and community negotiation. Lena never asked me to move back. I never asked her to follow me. We chose the inconvenience because it kept our choices honest. After 11 months, the nonprofit opened a Seattle satellite office and offered me regional leadership. I accepted because the work made sense, not because Lena was waiting. On my first evening back, I went to the old Marlowe and Finch office to meet her. The Harbor Light model was still beside the window. My repaired balcony rail remained slightly crooked if you looked closely. "Can you stay late?" she asked. I looked around the empty studio. "Are you planning to accuse me of financial crimes?" "Not tonight." She closed the door behind us, left it unlocked, and kissed me before I could answer. A year after that, we moved into an apartment halfway between her foundation office and my new studio. She still worked too late. I still checked every window twice during storms. We still argued about whether a building could be saved when the numbers said otherwise, but neither of us kept score for long. What mattered was that we learned how to stay, not by ignoring boundaries, but by telling the truth before fear could rewrite it, and making room for each other's choices instead of demanding sacrifice. People ask when Lena stopped being my boss and became the woman I loved. The official answer is simple. The day she changed roles and no longer had authority over my work. Something began the moment she trusted me with the evidence that could destroy her career. Something deepened when she admitted she was afraid of the dark. Something became undeniable when she stood before the board and refused to let suspicion replace facts. But love did not truly begin until we both walked away from the easier choice. I left for Portland rather than staying in confusion. She changed her career for reasons that belonged to her. Then we came back to each other as equals. The closed office door was never the most important thing. What mattered was that the door could be opened. It mattered that neither of us was trapped, pressured, or asked to surrender a future for the other. The night changed us because we discovered that honesty could survive attraction, fear, ambition, and time. And every now and then, when the office is quiet and rain begins tapping against the windows, Lena still looks at me with that same nervous courage and asks, "Can you stay?" Yes. So now I want to ask you, if your career, your reputation, and your feelings all collided in one unexpected night, which truth would you protect first? Would you risk staying long enough to discover what was real? Or would you leave before the line became too difficult to see? Share your answer in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more stories about the choices that change everything.